Around the year 800 AD, Polynesian explorers of the eastern Pacific prepared for an extraordinary journey that would forever change the lives of their people. Traveling in double-hulled canoes, they set their sights eastward, searching for new lands to colonize. For centuries, their ancestors had mastered the art of voyaging across vast, uncharted oceans. Guided by their intricate knowledge of the stars, sea currents, cloud formations, and the movements of seabirds, no written maps or navigation devices accompanied them. These seafarers relied solely on oral tradition. This particular group embarked on a daunting mission to locate a rumored fragment of habitable land reportedly sighted by an earlier expedition. Their journey was nothing short of monumental. The Pacific Ocean spans over 60 million square miles, covering nearly a third of Earth's surface. After what was probably years in the making, their perseverance paid off. They reached a tiny, isolated island in the vast ocean and named it Tepito o Tehunua, meaning the navel of the world, later to be known as Easter Island or Rapa Nui. Nestled in the Pacific Ocean, Easter Island, or Rapa Nui, holds mysteries that have fascinated historians and archaeologists for generations. The story of its first settlers is an extraordinary tale of navigation, adaptation, and ingenuity. Before the Polynesians that settled Rapa Nui, their ancestors had been voyaging across vast expanses of ocean water for thousands of years prior, navigating and settling the Pacific Ocean. To understand how the Polynesians reached Easter Island, we must go back about 6,000 years to the origins of the Austronesian migration, which began with the Sea Peoples of Southeast Asia. These early Austronesians thrived along coastal regions and islands, forging a deeply ocean-centered way of life. They lived on and around the sea, often relying on boats as their homes and using the ocean as their primary source of sustenance. Over time, they developed a rich maritime culture, mastering seafaring, boat building, and fishing throughout this part of the world. The starting point of the expansive Austronesian migration across the Pacific is believed to be Taiwan, located off the coast of Asia. This conclusion is primarily based on linguistic evidence, as Austronesians share a common language family that traces back to this region. Taiwan is considered the cradle of Austronesian culture, from where these seafaring peoples began their remarkable journey to populate vast parts of the Pacific. The era of great Polynesian oceanic exploration began with the Lapita culture, which emerged around 3,500 years ago. Centered on islands near Papua New Guinea and the Solomon Islands, the Lapita people were expert navigators and sailors who introduced double canoes they called wa'akalua, powered by sails and steered by a single oar at the back of the boat, and outriggers which made longer voyages across the Pacific possible. The outrigger is the single most important technological innovation developed by the Austronesians. This design allowed you to sail a narrow craft on the ocean for days at a time. Construction consisted of a hull with an outrigger connected by two struts, which gives the canoe stability and enables it to slice through the water more quickly. These twin-hulled boats were able to transport several families with their livestock and other possessions when they set off from Southeast Asia to cross the ocean. The outrigger could be said to be the foundation of the whole Polynesian ocean voyaging culture. The Lapita culture are easily identified archaeologically by their distinct, intricately decorated pottery, consisting of beakers, cooking pots, and bowls. Many of the pottery shards that have been found are decorated with geometric designs made by stamping the unfired clay with a tooth-like implement. A few shards with figurative designs have also been found. Lapita pottery has been found from New Guinea eastward to Samoa. Fish hooks, pieces of obsidian, and chert flakes, and beads and rings made of shells are the other principal artifacts of the Lapita culture. The Lapita subsisted largely, but not entirely, by fishing along the coasts of the islands on which they lived. They kept pigs, dogs, and chickens. Horticulture was based on root crops and tree crops, most importantly taro, yam, coconuts, bananas, and varieties of breadfruits. Long-distance trade was practiced. Items traded included obsidian, adzes, adze source rock, and shells. In around 900 to 800 BC, they reached all the way out to Tonga and Samoa. So you have people who were in places where islands are close and not so hard to travel from one to another. Then you get to Tonga and Samoa, and what you're looking at are islands that are very far apart, that require very long voyages, requiring advanced navigational skills and the ability to undertake long, open ocean voyages. Thanks to archaeological evidence, particularly their distinctive pottery, it's confirmed that the same people were present in both locations. This discovery highlights that it was these skilled voyagers who pioneered the long-distance oceanic journeys that would eventually lead to the settlement of remote Oceania. Reaching the islands of Tonga, Samoa, and also Fiji remained the furthest extent of the Austronesian expansion into Polynesia until around 700 CE, when there was another surge of island colonization, when they reached the Cook Islands, Tahiti, and the Marquesas by 700 AD. In accordance with Polynesian oral tradition, the geography of these first encountered Polynesian navigation pathways is said to resemble the geometric qualities of an octopus, with head centered on Polynesia, or Raiatea, and tentacles spread out across the Pacific. In oral tradition, the octopus is known by various names, such as Tomota Fe'e Fa'atupa Hau, the Grand Octopus of Prosperity, Tumurae Whenua, Beginning of Heaven and Earth, and Te Wiki a Matarangi, the Octopus of Mutarangi. This expansion and island hopping relied heavily on constant observation and memorization of the seas and sky, which got better and better over time. Navigators had to memorize where they have sailed from in order to know where they are. The sun was the main guide for navigators because they could follow its exact point as it rose and set. At night, the Polynesians relied on the fixed positions of stars for navigation, as opposed to the shifting paths of planets. Stars provided consistent reference points, with their rising and setting times varying slightly with the seasons. Each star had a specific declination, allowing navigators to use it as a bearing when it appeared near the horizon. Once a guiding star rose too high, they would switch to the next star in a memorized sequence specific to their route. Bird observation was also detrimental to their land findings. Certain seabirds such as the white tern and noddy tern fly out to sea in the morning to hunt fish, then return to land at night. Navigators seeking land sail opposite the bird's path in the morning and with them at night, especially relying on large groups of birds, and keeping in mind changes during nesting season. It is also believed that Polynesians, like many seafaring peoples, kept shore-sighting birds. One theory is that voyagers took a frigate bird with them. This bird's feathers become drenched and useless if it lands on water, so voyagers would release it when they thought they were close to land and would follow it if it did not return to the canoe. Polynesians also used stellar elevation to determine latitude, aligning their sailing with the known latitudes of their destination islands. This technique, called sailing down the latitude, involved following the trajectory of particular stars that passed directly over the target island. Since the movement of stars created consistent patterns across islands, navigators could rely on these celestial cues to adjust their course, using prevailing winds to travel east or west as they approached their destination. The Polynesians also used wave and swell formations to navigate. Many of the habitable areas of the Pacific Ocean are groups of islands, or atolls, in chains hundreds of kilometers long. Island chains have predictable effects on waves and currents. Navigators who lived within a group of islands would learn the effect various islands had on the swell shape, direction, and motion, and would have been able to correct their path accordingly. Even when they arrived in the vicinity of an unfamiliar chain of islands, they may have been able to detect signs similar to those of their home. Polynesian navigators could identify the clouds that resulted from the white sand of coral atolls reflecting heat into the sky. Subtle differences in the color of the sky also could be recognized as resulting from the presence of lagoons or shallow waters, as deep water was a poor reflector of light, while the lighter color of the water of lagoons and shallow waters could be identified in the reflection in the sky. And a cluster of clouds could indicate mountainous islands. Polynesians, now descendants of the Lapita culture, settled on the Marquesas Islands in around 700 AD. It is likely from here they set sail to Easter Island. Guided by the sun, stars, birds, and cloud patterns, they navigated across the Pacific in their famous double-hulled canoes. While the exact date of Easter Island's settlement is debated, evidence suggests it occurred around 800 AD. This estimate is based on radiocarbon dating of charcoal produced during forest clearing. However, linguistic studies propose an earlier date of around 400 AD, which is also about the time of the arrival of the earliest settlers in Hawaii, while some scientists argue for as late as 1200 AD. According to an Easter Island legend, a Polynesian chief named Hotumatua, or the Great Parent, sailed here in a double canoe from an unknown Polynesian island named Hiva, likely the Marquesas, with his wife, Vakai, and extended family. He may have been a great navigator, looking for new lands for his people to inhabit, or he may have been fleeing a land rife with warfare. Early Polynesian settlers had many motivations for seeking new islands across perilous oceans. It's clear that they were willing to risk their lives to find undiscovered lands. One legend has it that the king's royal advisor, Hau Maka, had a dream in which his spirit traveled to a far country to help look for new land for King Hotumatua. He traveled to the Matai Ke Tarangi, eyes that look to the sky, later to be known as Te Pito o Te Henua, navel of the earth. When Hau Maka woke, he told the king. The king then ordered 7 men to travel to the island from Hiva, their mythical home, to investigate. They found the land and returned to Hiva. The king himself then traveled to the new island. Whatever the reason, the king and his settlers made it to Easter Island, landing at Anakina Beach, and his people spread out across the island, and the king subdivided it between clans claiming descent from his sons. They brought with them bananas, taro, sugarcane, sweet potato, and paper mulberry, as well as chickens and Polynesian rats. The early inhabitants of Te Pito o Te Henua learnt about the nature of their island and did well in agriculture. The crops were abundant enough for them to invest work into things that didn't produce any food back, and so they developed a tradition of building big rectangular stone platforms called ahu, where they buried their kings and important people. Like many cultures in the world, the Rapa Nui culture has a history rooted in religion. Unlike in Western culture with a singular god, the Rapa Nui had multiple female and male deities that they worshipped. You can see these gods represented in the multiple carvings and rock drawings done throughout the island, such as Makemake, the supreme creator god, responsible for the creation of humans, animals, plants, and all living things, and Mana, a sacred power shared by the community that protected the land and people. Tattoos were a significant part of Rapa Nui culture, with priests, warriors, and chiefs having more tattoos than the rest of the population. Tattoos were considered to be a way to receive divine strength, or mana. The large palm, Pascalococos disperta, related to the Chilean wine palm, was one of the dominant trees as attested by fossil evidence. This species, whose sole occurrence was on Easter Island. The existence of the sweet potato in Polynesia appears to leave open the question of who were the original inhabitants of Rapa Nui. Botanists have proven that the sweet potato originally came from South America. So, does this mean that people from South America could have colonized the Pacific? According to Thor Heyerdahl, people from a pre-Inca society took to the seas from Peru and voyaged east to west, sailing in the prevailing westerly trade winds. He believes they may have been aided in an El Niño year, when the course of the winds and currents may have hit Rapa Nui directly from South America. In 1947, Heyerdahl himself showed that it was possible, at least in theory, using a balsa raft named Kontiki. He drifted 4,300 nautical miles for 3 months and finally ran aground on a reef near the Polynesian island of Puka Puka. There is little data to support Heyerdahl and all archaeological, linguistic, and biological data points to Polynesian origins in inland Southeast Asia. Interestingly, though, there are stone walls on Rapa Nui that resemble Inca workmanship. Heyerdahl contests that the scientific community has not addressed the fact that these walls are distinct in their Andean style. Even the infamous Captain Cook in 1774 Notice the quality of stonework in the supporting walls near the moai. The workmanship is not inferior to the best plain piece of masonry we have in England. They use no sort of cement, yet the joints are exceedingly close, and the stones mortised and tenanted one into another in a very artful manner. So, how to explain the sweet potato and superb stonework? It may be that the Polynesians sailed as far as South America in their migratory explorations and then, sometime later, turned around and returned to the South Pacific, carrying the sweet potato with them. Or perhaps there were visits from Peruvians who brought the sweet potato and their skilled understanding of stone masonry with them. What's interesting is DNA analysis suggests strongly that a single contact event occurred in eastern Polynesia between Polynesians and a Native American group most closely related to the indigenous inhabitants of present-day Colombia. But it doesn't seem to be clear if this contact was before or after the Polynesians colonized Easter Island. Undisputed is the fact that the sweet potato was, for the Rapa Nui people, the underpinning of Rapa Nui culture and the fuel for Mau buildings. After being on the island for a few hundred years, a second migration of only men arrived to the island. The new inhabitants had a different appearance. They were short and wide. They had a tradition of elongating their earlobes so that they hung down to their shoulders, a tradition that was later practiced also by the first group of settlers. To distinguish the two races, they were given names. The first group was called Hanua Momoka, Momoka being a duplication of the word moko, lizard, referring to the people that were tall and slender. The second group was called Hanuai Eepi meaning broad or bulky. At some point in time, all but one of the Hanua Eepi were exterminated by the Hanua Momoka, which means that the Rapa Nui people of today are mainly descendants of the Hanua Momoka, the original settlers. Even in Native American literature, an account of a Pacific expedition is written about, when Topo Inca Yupanqui, translated as Noble Inca Accountant, the 10th Saka Impa, or Emperor of the Inca Empire, also credited with leading a roughly 10-month-long voyage of exploration into the Pacific around 1470, reportedly visiting islands he called Nina Chumpi, Fire Belt, and Hawa Chumpi, Outer Belt. Historians and anthropologists believe that the two islands mentioned by the chroniclers are Mangariva and Easter Island, where oral traditions have claimed that a group of long-eared Hanua Eepi came to the island from an unknown land. Some historians, however, are skeptical that the voyage ever took place. After generations passed and the Rapa Nui began truly mastering the island during the 15th or 16th century, the civilization at this small and isolated piece of land was highly advanced. The crops were sufficiently abundant as to support a part of the population to concentrate entirely on building bigger and better statues. These megaliths were bought out by other tribes and put on the grave platforms, ahu, to commemorate those who had passed away. They called the statues Mau, to exist. The islanders transported and produced over 900 statues. The tallest Mau erected, called Pero, was almost 10 meters or 33 feet high and weighed 82 tons. The heaviest Mau erected was a shorter but squatter Mau at Ahu Tongariki, weighing 86 tons. One unfinished sculpture, if completed, would be approximately 21 meters or 69 feet tall, with a weight of around 160 tons. Almost all Mau have overly large heads, which account for 3/8 of the size of the whole statue. They also have no legs. The Mau are chiefly the living faces, the Aringa Ora of deified ancestors, the Aringa Ora Atatepua. It is also during this time the Rapa Nui developed the Rongo-Rongo, an ancient Rapa Nui glyph writing system written on tablets of wood. It is the only known native writing in all of Polynesia. Rongo-Rongo uses symbols of items, as with the Egyptian hieroglyphs. Oral history suggests that only a small elite was ever literate, and that the tablets were sacred. Authentic Rongo-Rongo texts are written in alternating directions, a system called reverse boustrophedon. In a third of their tablets, the lines of text are inscribed in shallow fluting carved into the wood. The glyphs themselves are outlines of human, animal, plant, artifact, and geometric forms. Today, only around 25 Rongo-Rongo tablets are known to exist. Further down the line, many slave raiders from Peru attacked Rapa Nui. All able-bodied men were taken, among them all the wise men who knew how to read and write Rongo-Rongo. Since then, no one knows how to interpret the tablets. Numerous attempts at decipherment have been made, but unfortunately none have been successful. The islanders grew in numbers throughout the generations. Much of the lush palm tree forests were cut down and burnt to clear areas for crops. During the era of Maui building, big quantities of lumber was needed for transportation of the statues. Across generations, more was cut than what sprouted, and wood was getting less common. As a result, finished statues awaiting transport started to gather up in the volcanic quarry of Ranu-Raraku, where virtually all statues were carved. As ultimately the resources of big trees were depleted in the 17th century, the carvers stopped working. On the contrary to popular belief, the disappearance of the trees did not extinguish the Rapa Nui culture. The islanders adapted well to their treeless island. The lack of trees made winds dry up the land, but the islanders used different techniques to keep the humidity in the soil. One is the manave, ring of stones that protects the soil it's surrounded to dry out. The less obvious kikiri was also used, areas covered in stone that would keep the soil below humid. The rainwater would also bring minerals from the stones into the earth. Traces of usage of these techniques are highly abundant all over Rapa Nui. For unknown reasons, a coup by military leaders on the island called Matatoa had brought a new cult based around a previously unexceptional god, Makemake. In the cult of the Birdman, or Tangata Manu, a competition was established, in which every year a representative of each clan, chosen by the leaders, would swim across shark-infested waters to Motunui, a nearby islet, to search for the season's first egg laid by a Manutara, Sooty Tern. The first swimmer to return with an egg and successfully climb back up the cliff to Orongo would be named Birdman of the Year and secure control over distribution of the island's resources for his clan for the year. The tradition was still in existence at the time of first contact by Europeans, but was suppressed by Christian missionaries in the 1860s. The first well-documented European contact happened in 1722 with the Dutch admiral Jacob Roggeveen. He arrived on Easter Day and chose to name the island thereafter. Instantly, after disembarking, they killed 12 people and injured many more for coming too close. It surely had a great impact on the islanders to see such an advanced technology that the Dutch showed. Jacob Roggeveen and his crew never reported seeing any statues that had fallen to the ground. Every statue they saw was standing. This was also reported in 1770 by later Spanish explorers. But by James Cook's visit in 1774, many were reported toppled. The Huri Maui, the statue toppling, continued into the 1830s. By 1838, the only standing Maui were on the slopes of Rano-Raraku and Ho'ahakana'ai at Orongo on the southwestern tip of the island. In about 60 years, islanders had damaged this part of their ancestors' heritage. Theories have ranged from intertribal warfare to loss of faith in their ancestors' ability to protect them. The Europeans report that the islanders they came across were well-built, strong, and had extremely white teeth, which were strong enough to open nuts with. The visiting Europeans generally estimate the islanders to be in the number of thousands, until the beginning of the 1860s, when 1,500 islanders were taken to work as slaves, which would mean most able-bodied men. Among the kidnapped were the ruling king as well as the wise men who knew how to read the Rongo-Rongo script, which today no one is left to interpret. The slaves worked in guano deposits at Chincha Islands and plantations in Peru. A few of these were later released, all of which died of smallpox on the return voyage, except for 2 people. These 2 spread the disease to the rest of the Rapa Nui population. The natives had no immune system towards this foreign disease, which resulted in an aggressive decrease of the population. A few years later, only 111 people were left on the island. In 1864, Catholic missionary Eugenio Arod learned about the troubling events at Rapa Nui and embarked on a 9-month visit to the island. 2 years later, he established a Catholic mission, aiming to bring change to the islanders' way of life. The missionaries encouraged the Rapa Nui to abandon traditional practices such as the Birdman competition, and successfully converted the population to Christianity. Following this period, no slave trade ever occurred at Easter Island again. No colonizing power showed much interest in Rapa Nui due to its remote location. However, Britain suggested that Chile claim the island to prevent France from doing so. In 1888, Chilean naval captain Policarpo Toro arranged for Rapa Nui's king, Atumu Tekena, to sign an agreement, granting Chile full and entire sovereignty over the island. However, the Rapa Nui translation of the treaty used terms like friendship and protection. Despite these differences, 1888 is officially recognized as the year Rapa Nui became part of Chile. The treaty was accompanied by a symbolic act. Atumu Tekena took a handful of grass in one hand and soil in the other. He handed the grass to Policarpo Toro while keeping the soil, symbolizing that the Rapa Nui people would remain the rightful owners of their land. Among Rapa Nui people, Chileans are still today sometimes referred to as maku, grass. Rapa Nui remained largely ignored by Chile until 1903, when the British-Chilean company Williamson Balfour and Company established the Eastern Island Exploitation Company. They signed a 50-year lease to use the island as a massive sheep farm. Natives were confined to the area now known as Hangaroa, surrounded by guarded borders to prevent sheep theft, while up to 70,000 sheep roamed freely across the island. After 1936, conditions improved slightly. With written permission, natives could visit the countryside and families occasionally received sheep as provisions. However, the invention of synthetic wool after World War II disrupted the wool market, while native resistance to their treatment continued to grow. These factors led to the Easter Island Exploitation Company abandoning the lease, leaving Rapa Nui in 1953. The Rapa Nui population today is around 3,000 people, though it is increasingly rare for children to have two Rapa Nui parents. The native language, Rapa Nui, is primarily spoken by elders, while younger generations, particularly those born after the 1980s, often have only a basic grasp of it and frequently switch to Spanish during conversations. A deeper understanding of the ancient language has become somewhat rare and exclusive. Chile actively supports the preservation of Rapa Nui culture through the National Corporation for Indigenous Development, or CONADI. The government funds well-designed projects proposed by islanders to protect and sustain their heritage. This initiative can be seen as a step toward reconciling past injustices and recognizing the island's unique cultural legacy. Easter Island's history is a story of incredible human ingenuity, resilience, and connection to the natural world. From the first Polynesian settlers navigating vast oceans to create a thriving society, to the awe-inspiring creation of the Maui statues, Rapa Nui's people achieved feats of stonework and engineering that continue to captivate every single one of us today. These towering monuments are a testament to their artistry, cultural identity, and deep spiritual connection to their ancestors. Today, the Rapa Nui people continue to live on their ancestral island, maintaining their cultural traditions while navigating the challenges of modernity. Many Rapa Nui express a deep connection to their history and a determination to preserve their unique heritage. Efforts are being made to revitalize the Rapa Nui language and ensure their culture remains alive for future generations. At the same time, there are mixed feelings about tourism and development, which bring both economic opportunities and the risk of cultural erosion. These conversations echo the broader challenges faced by indigenous communities worldwide: how to maintain their identity and traditions while embracing modern opportunities.